is but one gem among the unique architectural ensembles of Moscow. The Novodevichy Monastery is a splendid monument of ancient Moscow architecture. This women's convent was founded in the early 16th century. Now there is a museum there. The former Andronikov Monastery now houses a museum of ancient Russian art. Its collection numbers approximately 2,000 items dating from the 14th to the early 18th centuries. Icons, fragments of frescoes, jewelry, wooden carving. On the territory of the Andronikov Monastery, there is Moscow's first stone church, the Uspensky Cathedral. The Andronikov Monastery, along with the Novodevichy and several others, in the past protected the approaches towards Moscow. Hard has been the fate of the Danilov Monastery. At one time it even housed a prison for juvenile delinquents. For the millennium of Christianity in Russia, the monastery was restored and expanded, and the Russian Orthodox Church moved its spiritual and administrative center there. Today, services are held in 53 of Moscow's Orthodox churches, in 2 synagogues, 1 mosque, and 1 Polish Roman Catholic church. 60 various religious organizations are operating in the city. Old Believers, Evangelical, Christian Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists. There are quite a few old estates and mansions that have survived within the boundaries of Moscow. Kolomenskoye, Pashkov House, Kuskova with its splendid museum of ceramics, Those who want to get the fullest possible picture of the history of Moscow simply must visit the Sheremetyev Palace in Ostankino. It houses a museum of the art of serf peasants. The ancient and the modern are intimately intertwined in Moscow, like these churches around the Rossiya Hotel. Today's Moscow sprawls over an area of almost 900 square kilometers and has a population of almost 900 million. The streets and avenues run for 3,300 kilometers, while its gardens and parks cover an area of 87,000 acres. But even the most impressive figures will hardly remain in one's memory for long. The Russians like the saying, "It's better to see once than to hear 100 times." So let's take a keener look at the features of today's Moscow, so that alongside ancient images, the memory would retain a picture of a modern city. "40 years ago, 7 high-rise buildings were built in Moscow, all quite similar, yet at the same time differing from one another. These were Moscow University, the Foreign Ministry, hotels and residential buildings. But they're placed in such a way so that one or several of them could be seen from almost any more or less high point in Moscow. And the only structure that's more prominent is perhaps the Ostankino TV tower. Moscow is a major transport hub. Passengers are serviced by 4 airports and 9 railway stations. In certain days, the number of tourists may reach 5 million. The halls of the Moscow subway, the metro, are unparalleled for their architecture and splendor of decorations. If you look at a map, you'd certainly be surprised by the statement that Moscow is a port of 5 seas. And yet a system of rivers and canals links Moscow's river ports with the ports of the Baltic, White, Caspian, Azov and Black Seas. It's not often that Muscovites set off on long sea cruises, yet rides on pleasure boats are very popular. Among the building complexes towering over the river, one of the most impressive is the World Trade Center, known to Muscovites as the Hammer Center, after its founder, the American businessman Armand Hammer. Today, some 100 foreign firms and banks have their permanent offices in this center. In central avenues and in quiet side streets, one can now increasingly often see notices of joint ventures between Soviet and foreign firms, as well as of Western companies. New Soviet organizations are entering the world stage. Moscow is trying to make more efficient use of its industrial and above all intellectual potential. After all, Moscow-based scientists account for 60% of all inventions made in the USSR. Soviet advanced technology is displayed at the National Exhibition of Economic Achievements, the country's biggest exhibition complex, consisting of 78 pavilions. The 300 or so exhibitions displayed in them are annually visited by 11 million people. Specialists from factories and leading scientific centers gather here for numerous conferences and seminars. The pavilions operate about 30 information centers on the basic branches of science and technology. Ever more joint ventures are setting up their offices at the exhibition, like for instance this pavilion belonging to the Razma joint venture. Moscow is a major cultural center. Its theaters and concert halls can simultaneously accommodate 130,000 spectators. The city has over 100 museums. One of the most revered is the Tretyakov Gallery, the world's biggest collection of Russian and Soviet art. It's named after its founder, the Moscow industrialist and patron of the arts, Pavel Tretyakov. Foreign art from the most ancient times till our days is displayed in the Pushkin Fine Arts Museum. The collection includes works by Rembrandt, Rubens, Renoir, Van Gogh, Gauguin, Matisse and Picasso. Bohemian Arbat is crowded every day. This is one of Moscow's oldest streets. Several years ago, Arbat was restored and made into a pedestrian street, which immediately became a haven for amateur artists and actors. The majority are attracted not so much by the money as by the desire to, as the Russians say, show off oneself and take a look at others. The narrow streets in central Moscow can be described as a preserve of old Russia, and you can see Moscow here almost exactly as it used to be. Arbat and the surrounding side streets have lots of artistic connotations. Poets Pushkin and Blok, writers Gogol and Leo Tolstoy, the composer Scriabin, the artist Polyanov. Observing the panorama of Moscow from the Lenin Hills, you cannot miss the huge stadium and sports complex on the opposite lower bank of the Moskva River. It was here that the Olympic flame burned in the summer of 1980. These buildings too were built for the Olympics. Among them is Europe's biggest indoor stadium for 45,000 spectators. The arena is suited for such sports as athletics, gymnastics, bandy and soccer, and it's here that Western rock stars perform during their tours. Moscow. There's hardly any other world capital that would have lived through so many rises and falls, catastrophes and rebirths. If we trace the history of this great city, each age will echo with events going far beyond Moscow boundaries. And on each one of your visits to Moscow, be it the first or the 10th, you'll always find something yet unknown and incomprehensible in the appearance of the people living in the city, in the appearance of streets, avenues and squares. Take a closer look at them, for it is not for nothing that the ancients used to say, "He who visited Moscow knows Russia."